Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy, I would say a little overcast, a little gray. It did rain in Los Angeles, but who knows? You may be joining us from somewhere else in the country. If this is your first time with us, hello, my name is Sadie Uribe, and I'm the media producer for the Los Angeles Regional SBDC. The SBDC is a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, helping to stimulate economic growth through business advising and development. The LASBDC offers no-cost services through funding provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. It's your tax dollars at work. Whoop, and let me get this little module going. There we go. The Los Angeles Regional SBDC Network operates 7 service locations throughout Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Our services are also offered virtually. We are here to help. We empower small business owners by offering tailored solutions through personalized one-on-one business advising, cutting-edge workshops, and comprehensive programs, all provided at no cost. We are dedicating to supporting your entrepreneurial journey every step of the way. Oh, Lori, I'm excited for today's webinar because I know when we get two advisors to going, there's a lot of magic that happens.
It sure is, and thank you everybody for being here today, especially because I think summer vacation for you guys is starting pretty soon. So I always am really happy when you guys want to hang out during the summer with me. So sure do appreciate that. So let's get started today because, like Sadie said, we have a great show coming. And by the way, if you guys missed last week, check it out on the YouTube channel. Sadie will put that link in there. It was just a phenomenal show. I'm still kind of just in awe over it. And those of you who were here last week know exactly what I'm talking about. But I had them get that on the YouTube channel pretty quickly because I know a lot of you wanted to watch it again. Okay, upcoming in June, I've got the financial literacy series. I also have the Sole Prop LLC S Corp, which one and why, trying to clear up. I mean, those I don't even know what to say. Those incorrect facts. That's all I can say. Just completely incorrect. Every single week, I have a couple people that are telling me, oh, somebody told them that they should be this structure because of this, and it's absolutely not true. So do check that out or at least get some advice before choosing one of these structures. I also brought back the should you be charging your customer sales tax, what you need to know. I talk a lot about the economic nexus, which I'm actually going to bring up in a second because I learned something else new. Sales tax did not used to be confusing, guys. It was a pain. I'm not going to say it wasn't a pain, but it wasn't really confusing. But right now, or I should say ever since I think it was 2018 when economic nexus came into play, and then we have all the online platforms, sales tax has become more confusing than ever. So what I find is a lot of people who are selling online, especially if they're selling through the platform Shopify, they click the sales tax button thinking they're doing everything fine when actually it's just calculating, collecting, putting it in their bank account and not remitting to the government. So inadvertently, I'm seeing innocent little small businesses committing fraud with the government, collecting sales tax without a seller's permit and then keeping the money and having no idea because they're not checking their bank account. So it's gotten to be a very serious thing, not quite understanding how economic nexus changed the environment of sales collection. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my Lori's Corner, but before I do, let me announce my upcoming guest. So next week, I got Rachel coming on from Refined Media Group. I have not had somebody come on and talk about marketing and social media all that in quite some time. I really wanted to have somebody that's very knowledgeable and skilled in this area. So Rachel is going to come on and share her insight and expertise. Craig, who is a fellow advisor at the PCC SBDC, has a long history of restaurant ownership and franchising. Haven't really had somebody come on and talk about the ins and outs of owning a restaurant and franchising, and that can apply to so many different areas. So, real excited to have him come on. And the end of the month, the last week, Sue is coming on, and she is the founder and owner of the modern schoolhouse, and they're currently expanding into additional locations. So it's going to be a fun story about business growth and the challenges in that. So for Lori's Corner, I just want to bring up sales tax again and about what I'm going to say here. I'm not giving it enough detail to explain it thoroughly because Lori's Corner is just kind of mentioning a few things. And if it's something you need to know about, always reach out for more information. But yesterday I got a question from a client that stumped me. It stumped me. I'm, not like claiming to be the ultimate sales tax expert, but I'm very familiar with economic nexus, the ruling, the laws, all that. I've been following it for some time. But this particular client, and I'll go slow because it was confusing to even understand, he sells online. He sells through manufacturers products, so he's a distributor. He buys from manufacturers and distributes the products, and he sells online. Now the tricky part is when he buys from the manufacturer also handles the drop shipping to the customer. Now in that, the product never leaves the manufacturer's facility. It's going right from the manufacturer's facility to the drop ship. Now the question was, because the manufacturers were sometimes charging him sales tax, and then he knew economic nexus, he sometimes had to charge sales tax, and sometimes he was wondering if it was double taxation, and the manufacturers were telling him different things. He wanted to know which is the correct thing. So the way sales taxes always worked is the word nexus means a physical presence. You have a physical presence in a location. So if you are physically present in your company or your sales office or any type of physical presence in California, you have to follow California sales tax laws. When you drop ship to another state, you have to follow their sales tax laws, right? So I was trying to figure out, well, if the product never left the manufacturer, but he is transferring legal, how is it that the relationship between taxing him from the manufacturer and then him taxing the drop ship end user customer, right? Which I knew came under economic nexus. So I called a sales tax expert that worked for the IRS auditing and sales tax, and I found out this most fascinating thing. And that is because the product does not leave the manufacturer's facility, the client, my client, who actually is in California, must assume physical nexus in each one of those states, and then economic nexus when drop shipped. Yeah, crazy. And so he has to have a seller's permit in each of the states that he has the manufacturing relationship, and then a seller's permit in each of the states that require sales tax on economic nexus. If your head's spinning, it should be. Mine was. I was glad to have the expert to reach out to. But my conclusion on this is saying, once again, guys, there's no such thing as a small business. I know I say that every single week, and you're like, Lori, you work with small businesses. Here we are, here we are. But you know what I'm saying is when you look at the rules, the regulations, and everything that a small business owner has to be aware of, they are under the same types of rules and regulations that a corporation is. So you really got to have an understanding of these things. Otherwise, you get one of those nasty letters from some government official, and you never want to have that happen. So if any of this hit a chord, if you're wondering if you should do something different with your sales tax, join me in the webinar. I'm going to add this information to this webinar because, like I said yesterday, I even got stumped. I even got stumped on that. But, it's good that sometimes I do have experts that I can reach out that know more than I do. And speaking of that, I reached out to Clarissa Wilson, and she's been on the show before, and she comes out and talks about accounting. But Clarissa has had a long history in accounting, financial analysis, and worked for the IRS analyzing sales tax. So I asked Clarissa to come on in July, talk about this in more detail, as well as I want her to talk a little bit more about her spreadsheet that she uses for companies that don't need a QuickBooks, etc., and they just want to use it in Excel spreadsheets. She's got a pretty cool one, so I'm going to have her demonstrate that. All that's coming in July. But enough in Lori's Corner. Let's get started. So today we're going to be talking with Ann Vu, who is the founder of 124 Voltaire. Voltaire pulls from quintessential, couldn't get that word out, quintessential styles of New York City, LA, Paris, and London, and hand picks every item with particular women in mind, and these items are sold on her website. Now, we are going to learn a lot about the company, and as always on Small Biz Talk, we're going to take many twists and turns as we learn the story. Anne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lori. Thank you for having
Hello.
me.
You are so welcome. I'm excited to have you here. And by the way, I'll do a spoiler alert. Anne is also a fellow advisor through the SBDC through the lead center, right? You're through the main lead center, right?
Yeah.
So we've got the contact information. So the spoiler alert is yes, you get to reach out to Anne with a one-on-one appointment at no charge, just like Sadie explains every time at the beginning of the show. So you're going to want to grab that contact information if anything she says resonates with you. Okay, I had to make that announcement. So you're involved in fashion. Have
Yeah.
you always been involved in fashion? Did you always want to be involved in fashion? We love stories of how things began. So take us back into whatever time frame that you want and tell us where you first were and how it evolved.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, Lori, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Um, so basically, yeah, no, I would have not always been involved in fashion or retail. I think it's kind of funny because like I never even had a retail job in like one of my high school summer jobs. Like I never worked retail, but I had just finished graduate school. I was kind of doing this healthcare track. I was working at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in New York City, and I had been working there for about 2 years, and I just wasn't feeling fulfilled. I'm like, I was pretty entry level. Yeah, I was very young. But I just realized at that young age that I was kind of like, I don't know if a career in like a big corporation like this is really the path for me. And I actually have a sister who kind of did a very 180 career change herself. She was an orthopedic surgeon turned shoe designer. And I remember going out to dinner with her one day, and, we were sitting in New York City having dinner, and she said, how's your job? And I'm like, it's okay, and then we just kind of started talking. She's like, would you ever consider opening up your own store? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like a dream, but I don't think I could do that. And she was like, well, you should consider it because you have a really good eye. And then I was kind of thinking, well, okay, maybe I should just go get my master's and like go to business school and get my master's there, my MBA, and then consider opening something up. And she's like, why would you do that? She's like, you don't need that degree, and um, you're smart enough to just to do it, just like go out and do it.
You
So,
know, and this is a good spot to just kind of stop and talk about this for a bit because you know what's interesting is everybody knows about the education I have in business and the MBA, right? Well, I have a 2-year degree in biology and science because my first job after picking beans on the farm and all that was a phlebotomist and then being a lab technician drawing blood because that's kind of what my parents said. Well, you could either pick beans on the farm or go do this because that's what my sister did, right? So I can still remember, getting in the field and working and then realizing after spending time in getting a degree, and I only had 2 years, was going for the four when I switched, that I didn't want to do what I went to school to learn. That's
mhm.
a very challenging moment, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Because it's just like a shift in the way, you've always thought. And, I remember even walking home from that dinner thinking, there's no way I can do this. Like, no, no, no. And then by the next morning, I was like, there's no way I can't. I have to
And
at least
yeah,
try.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
And
So,
the other part I'd like to bring into that, so this is the other part. So at the time, I felt like, oh my God, I wasted the time, I wasted the money, right? Well, now, part of the reason that I'm very good at seeing financials is because I rely on the original research training I had in building hypothesis, checking my data, and everything I talk about all day long is data and the importance of data collection and variable data and all this, which really ties directly back to that 2 year that I took and three because I started continuing and that early training. So the other side of the coin is I think there's three sides. I'll let you comment on it, Anne, but I think this is important for people to hear that may be feeling similar things or come upon it in the future is that one, just because we choose something doesn't mean we can't change.
Yeah.
Two, that when we feel the need and are pulled in a direction, pursue it and see what's out there for you. And three, nothing is ever a waste and nothing's lost. It took me this age to come to that conclusion. Is ever a waste and nothing's lost, because back at the number one, we feel like it's a waste and lost, and it's not true. So just before we leave that, for anybody that resonates with, any thoughts on that?
Um, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Oh no, I agree with you 100%. I will say I understand the idea that like yes, it could be considered a waste is, also education is not inexpensive, but
Right.
kind of similar to you, I got my master's in public health and there was an emphasis in biostatistics, which really trained my mind to use data and to like look at problems very analytically. And that's something you carry over no matter what you're doing. And then, you know, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but going back to like you will always have that to fall back on. And
Yeah.
I will say, just to give you like a little fast forward, I have now transitioned into a career also in like doing kind of working more on like the business side for biotech companies. But if I didn't
Okay.
have that original background in healthcare, it would have been very, very difficult for me to get into what I'm currently doing. So, I know
Yeah.
it's probably like a lot of twists and turns, but that's what we're
But
here
that's
for.
what life's about, and it always makes sense at the end. It never makes sense when you're going forward, but it always makes sense. In fact, I always said, because I'd been a climber for a long time, and you struggled trying to figure out the right way to go up the side of a cliff, right? And then I always said I was going to write when you're, oh, I should say when you're hiking back down, everything's so obvious. So I was going to write a bio, and I was going to call it "Everything I learned on the way down," because that's what
Yeah,
it becomes, and it makes so much sense.
I love
Okay,
that.
so you have this dinner, your sister puts this little thought in your mind,
Yeah. Planted
instigates
the
a little
seed.
spark.
Yeah.
You're walking home. What happens next?
Yeah, so like from then on, I just kept thinking about it, and then I started looking for spaces, like retail, like commercial spaces. I knew exactly where I wanted to open, like the neighborhood, and I literally there was a sign in the window, and I called the broker and looked at the space. It's not super easy to get a commercial real estate,
Yep,
lease in
yep,
especially in New York City.
yeah.
It's very competitive. So I would say, like, fortunately for me, I was able to have my sister who had an established brand kind of co-sign for me. I mean, she didn't actually
Oh,
technically
okay.
co-sign the lease, but she, was like, well, like I have this brand and she'll be carrying my shoes there, So it helps. I mean, so I would say, use any connection you have, and just sort of use whatever you have to your advantage because everyone else is. And so you need to like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
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 so you got to take the leap, and she softened the leap a little bit
yeah,
more. But
yeah.
still, that had to be going from a mentality and working for a big company to, hey, I'm going to do this on my own and sign a lease. That's scary. That's really
It's
scary.
yeah, it is. But it's so funny when you're like such a novice is like you're almost it's like thank God I was so like oblivious
I
to
know, I know, I know.
what was
It's so true. It's so
yeah,
true.
I was just like, oh sure, like I can do I signed a 10-year lease,
Oh my God.
which is wild. And it was you can imagine too, in the middle of New York City, that lease was like not cheap. And
Yeah.
but I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, well, okay, this is what my monthly rent is gonna be, so I guess I have to sell this much merchandise.
Well, and
It's like
there's a
as
truth
simple
in
as
that.
that.
I always say the innocence of youth sometimes can be just incredible, can it? As we get older and wiser, we're like, oh, no, no, don't want to do
Yeah.
that. Don't want to do that. So you got the lease, you open it up, you got your sister's shoes, you then have to get other people's shoes as well. So now you're
Well,
this novice. So tell us
yeah.
about that experience. And people love to hear what it took, I'm just going to say in general, to knock on cold doors. That's where I'm going. The
100%.
audience
Yeah.
loves to know that because they're sitting in their place trying to think this through and they're like, huh,
Mhm.
knocking on a cold
Yeah.
door. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So even though I had my sister's shoes, like I actually, that's not my specialty. Is my specialty is the apparel. And so it was actually just kind of nice just to have like the shoes, already like figured out.
Right,
But in terms of like apparel, I didn't know how the industry worked at all. Again,
right.
I'm totally green. And that basically knocking on people's doors is exactly what I did. I walked around in the neighborhood that I was signing my lease in, partly to introduce myself and then also just to like talk to people. And like, fortunately, at that time in the neighborhood, there were a lot of independently owned boutiques. And so chances are when I walked in somewhere, I was able to talk to the owner.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
slowly I kind of learned, all right, well, these are the trade shows you go to. And, um, there's one coming up and let me just go, and I just registered and went. And I just really learned along the way. I made mistakes, but I kind of was very on top of my business, especially the first couple of years, so that when I did make a mistake, I could recognize it and try to pivot as quickly as possible. But yeah, I mean, like, I didn't know how to place an order. I mean, I understood obviously, like, okay, I need to have a budget. I need to know how much. But I mean, for me, it was just like very simple. Like, if my rent is this much, and I, will have payroll or other expenses, how much am I going to have to sell? And then how much should I then from there, how much should I fill up my store?
Yeah.
With
There's two
merchandise.
gems that you mentioned, and one of them's just something I want to make a note to the audience in case they did not catch this. And then I've got a question for you on it is that you went around the neighborhood and spoke to what would technically be called your competitors, right? And I
Mhm.
think there's a misnomer by too many entrepreneurs that competitors won't speak to you or you're not fellow on the same side. And you actually are. There can be such great relationships by two people that are competing. And even though you're a boutique, you're selling different things, etc. But I think never underestimate the power of reaching out with people in your industry doing the same thing. They may be also really welcoming a conversation because you can relate fully to each other.
Exactly. I think people would find that more often than not, like other business owners are going to be very receptive to helping a fellow entrepreneur out. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
the other part was a comment that you made that I'd like to delve in a little bit more because it was very wise and I think there's some details to it. You mentioned and you used the phrase, I stayed on top of it the first year, right? Which I know you stayed on top of it after that. But what I find and go anywhere on this, it's my soapbox thing, people. Here I am, guys. You know what I'm gonna bring up. Somebody can put in the chat, what is Lori gonna talk about? You can almost guess. I'm amazed at how many entrepreneurs do not know their gross profit and do not know their net profit, and they don't know it as percentage, and they actually don't even fully know the cost of goods. And I just recently had some people that are in retail that don't know that. Yes, Chris, know your numbers. Yes, yes, Cogs. Look at everybody. See, they know me by now.
Yeah.
So you did not come from a financial background. To what degree did you delve into the cost and the margins and what caused you to or not? And what did you learn? I just want an open forum. Yeah, yeah. Chris, I gotta say, I always say you gotta have enough money to afford a quart of milk. That's what I always say. I'm like, revenue really doesn't count. Net income does. You gotta buy a quart of milk. That's my
Yeah.
statement I say all the time. So anywhere you want to go on that, Anne, on how you handled the numbers.
I mean, yeah, I honestly, in the beginning, was just using an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, I had QuickBooks, but um I just for me, like I'm very visual. I like to see everything on one page. I actually
Notice that.
remember,
Notice that. I gotta tell you that, guys. Remember, I always say an Excel spreadsheet is how you see. QuickBooks is not. I had to interrupt because I tell people when you have an Excel spreadsheet, especially starting out, it's flat. It's in your face. You see things. Didn't mean to interrupt, but look at guys. Another point. Another point. Keep going, Ann.
yeah. What's funny is I remember visiting the Small Business Development Center here in New York at
Oh,
Pace University, and like meeting with a nice business advisor who gave me my first spreadsheet to use. And like, it's very straightforward, it's not anything overcomplicated. It's just really like your sales, top line, and then COGS and other fixed overhead. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's where I started, and instead of starting the top line, I filled out the fixed expenses, which of course, I did have to alter as time went on. But the nice thing about, like as you gain more experience, you have more data to work with too. So
yeah.
like there were less surprises a year into it as there was, the first 2 months.
That's
Uh,
so true. I always say as a CFO, we hate surprises. So we make sure we have plenty of data and we collect historical data to test our assumptions. The minute historical data hits, we're grabbing it to check our assumptions. So, so true. So,
yeah.
and how long did you have the company, the brick and mortar, and what happened?
Well, I had versions of a brick and mortar store for uh over 16 years.
Wow,
So
long time.
opened
Yeah.
my first store in 2004. That was
Okay.
a long time ago. I'm
Yep.
giving away giving some hints into my age, which is not great, but yeah, I've been around the block for a while. And I opened in 2004. The first couple of years were great, I mean, I was like, wow, yeah, like this is kind of, I wouldn't say easy, but I'm like, it's really fun. I hadn't hit any major speed bumps yet. But although
Okay.
I didn't know that I hadn't, because I'm like, oh, well, this is, like, yeah, this is just running a business. And then 2008 hit, the
Oh,
recession.
yep. Yep.
And yeah, that was a major killer,
I
I mean,
remember that well. I was heavy into interim CFO work at that time, so I had a lot of clients
oh,
into bad.
yeah,
I'm painfully aware of that
yeah,
time, and I'm sure being a clothing boutique, you got hit
yeah.
pretty hard as well.
Yeah, and my price point was kind of it's considered like better contemporary price point. So it wasn't designer, but it wasn't like, inexpensive like fast fashion. And so it's kind of like in that in between price point. And I think that was sort of the price point that was hit the hardest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
I agree. I totally agree because if it was cheap, people were flocking to it. If it
yeah,
was really expensive, they still had some money.
yeah,
And that is the
exactly.
one. You're absolutely correct. I saw the same thing within the clients I was working at.
Yeah, yeah. So, I kind of just did what I could do to I'm like, I could do one of two things, preferably a combination of both. I can increase my profits, like somehow, or increase my sales,
Right.
or lower
Oh,
my fixed expenses. And I did kind of a combination. So what I did was I rented out part of my space. I had
okay.
a really big retail space. It was about, it was like 2,000 square feet, which is, when I first opened, I had this very like open concept kind of store, but I'm like, well, also the aesthetic was changing around then too. Like it now, like that was a time when like it was more like about the Americana look, where things were kind of like tightly packed in, but in a very tasteful way. It was just different. So I brought in a home goods store so that it wouldn't compete with
Oh,
mine.
nice.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and then I also figured out a way to source things that were going to be a little less expensive, but that I could mark up a little bit more, so that would increase my
Nice.
profit.
Yep.
But really the big thing I did, and this was not planned, but I think it's a testament to how fortuitous it can be to talk to people. Just like it doesn't matter, like fortunately I had a retail store, so there were all sorts of people coming in my store, and I was able to have conversations with people from all walks of life. And I remember there was a nice woman who was in my store for like 2 hours, during those 2 hours, we were just chatting, and then she asked, how's the recession been for you? And I was like, it's been tough. It's really hard, And she said, well, she goes, I actually live part-time in Naples, Florida, And let me tell you, there are more millionaires than not down there. And she's like, you should consider opening up a store there because you can't even tell there's a recession.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, but the funny thing is like I had no idea what Naples, Florida was. Like I didn't,
Are you
like
telling me that you ended up with a store? I can't wait to hear this. So what did you do?
yeah, so she was actually she told me specifically which like this new development that had just opened, and she's like you should contact them because they are just now opening. It's like all the talk of the town, like it's this new thing that like new development that's open. It was like a mixed use development. So they're apart like condos above and then, sort of like an outdoor type mall type thing, and she's like they had a lot of she was in the real estate world, so she worked in real estate, and
Okay.
so she kind of knew what was happening, and she said they had a lot of their spaces leased out, but then because of the recession a lot of them pulled out. A lot of like sort of the more national retailers pulled out, so they're kind of like begging people to come. So I reached out to them, the leasing office, and they flew me down to show me the
Oh,
property. And I was kind of like, I mean, they gave me like a really good deal. Like for the first, I think 2 years, it was something where there was a base minimum that I had to pay, which was quite low, or 10% of my sales, whichever one was
okay.
higher.
Okay.
And I'm like, there it's pretty low risk. It's just a matter of like having to buy the inventory, and then putting in the work to actually get
Right.
it up and running. But, it was a brand new build, so it didn't require like a major build out. In fact, because it was only my first lease was only 2 years, I was like, everything's going to be kind of temporary. I'm not going to really like
Yeah.
build out, walls and stuff. So I did that. And before long, it became more profitable than my New York store.
Wow.
And
Okay,
yeah,
there's two things I got to say. One of the gems on it is that so often people say things, but you actually act on it. And I always say, we have to do some level of action to take
yeah,
advantage of opportunity. I mean, this person comes in, talks to you,
yeah,
says this, and you checked it out and look at, so it's a kind of a shout out to all of us, myself included, is to be aware of when those little wonderful miracles come, but do some action to check it out. And the other thing I just want to mention before I forget is going back to the subleasing. When I've had clients that have signed real estate lease deals, right? And
mhm,
they're a little bit more than I think they should, I've told them, double check the language to see if you can sublet. And they said to me, well, I'm not going to sublet. And I go, you never know
yeah,
when you may need to. In the recession, that's what we did with a lot of the clients too. We sublet and some of them couldn't. So that's why it's a shout out to anybody signing a lease. If it's a pretty good size lease you're signing and you're signing it for a time period, double check that sublet because you never know. I didn't want to leave without getting that wonderful gem. So now the Florida store is working better than the New York store. What did you do next? I can't wait.
yeah. So so then I never really wanted to relocate to Florida full time. So I said, I'll come down often, but I'm gonna be residing full time in New York. But then I came back to New York after opening that store, and then so by then it was like 2000, like around 2011, and my landlord for the New York store approached me and said, would, because I had a 10-year lease, so
Right.
it was good until 2014. And he said, would you consider leaving and I'll pay you out? Because by then, like that neighborhood had just blown up. If anyone knows New York City, it was in like the center of Nolita. And he knew he could get so much more out of it than what I was paying. And like, I didn't have any kind of contingency clause in my lease. So I knew that once my lease was over, he could raise it to whatever he wanted to, and then I would
Right.
have to leave anyways,
Yeah, you'd have to leave anyway, so why not take
Yeah,
advantage, especially since the store wasn't really giving you the profit you needed?
exactly.
Why stay? It's like, okay, I'm getting a good price on a non-profitable business. Doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was so we signed a deal for 2012, early 2000, basically the end of 2011, I was going to move out and vacate. It's funny because he did turn around and rent out my space for $35,000 a month after I left. So I'm like, well, I definitely wouldn't have been able to afford that. So I
Yes,
said,
yes,
I'm
exactly.
like, I might as
Yeah,
well like get some
yeah,
money out of it too,
right.
and it was only 2 years and I was a bit drained, anyways, like, it was just like, also anyone who has a retail store knows it's a very slow burn, you've got to be there all the time. Like you try to schedule days off for yourself, but it's always on your mind because you're open, almost every single day of the year. And it's very taxing.
Like a restaurant, there's no freedom from it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I know a restaurant's probably worse than
Yeah, it is a bit. Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, so then I had my store in Naples, Florida, but I was still residing in New York. I still refused to move down there full time. But what the good thing about it though was that it forced me to create really efficient processes,
I
whereas
was just going to ask that, and managing people too. You had to
yeah,
get people in you can trust. I see people right in the place and they can't get people to manage their company and they don't have good processes, and you're doing it from afar. I
yeah,
love processes. That's another one of my favorite word. Tell
yeah.
me a little bit about some of the key processes you had in place to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was also a long time ago. It was
Right.
2012, right? And things were very analog, but like I made them keep up to date, like this, again, a spreadsheet
Yeah.
of how many people are walking in, how many
Oh,
people are trying
beautiful.
stuff on, and how many people are purchasing. I mean, that is
That's
information I could
lovely.
get, from my POS, but like that was data that was very useful because I know like if people are walking in and not trying anything on, that means there's something that's not resonating with the
Yes.
floor. If they're trying stuff on but then not buying, that means there's something wrong with the product. So that was just like information that was very helpful especially when I'm far away. Like when I was in my New York store, like I would just see it because I was there all
Right.
the
You
time,
could,
and
yeah.
so I never really developed that sort of that rule or told or trained by employees, like this is something that's really important to keep track of. So, I mean, it was stuff like that. And then of course, just like, I mean, I was fortunate to find a pretty decent manager who was with me for a few years. Again, I say I was fortunate because it's not easy to find
No, it's
good
not.
employees, much less someone like a manager that you can trust. And she was just like an excellent salesperson, which I never even had that in New York. Um, so yeah, for a few years that went really well. I got confident enough to actually open another store in Florida, and that this was like it was in Bonita Springs, was it? But it was like a little bit north of where my no, Estero, that was the town that it was in. But I figured they're within driving distance, so if I went to go visit, I could visit both stores.
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
And you
So
know what else I want to point out is, when you were talking about being able to observe how many people are coming in, trying on, and then your POS confirming the buys. Um, so many people don't realize that the data, going back to our love of the word data, that needs to be analyzed isn't just the data that comes out of your QuickBooks or whatever, your bank account. A lot of it is observing behaviors, and it's the
yeah,
combination of the behaviors and the financial. They have the marketing people analyze behaviors, the financial people analyze numbers, but it's really when you combine the two is where the special sauce, the secrets become
yeah,
obvious. And so I just wanted to point that out as well. So now
yeah,
you have two stores. What
yeah.
happens next?
Yeah, so then I had that for like that was like running for a few years, but sort of inevitably, like once my manager left, I started really having difficulty with staffing.
Yeah.
And I was going down a lot more than I wanted to. And it it's a certain, like, it's an expensive thing to have to keep going down there.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
like a super long flight or anything, but it's like I'd have to get a hotel and this and that.
Right.
So I actually decided in 2014 that I was just going to head down there and commit like a year and run it myself, because like I said, I was having difficulty staffing, like finding a good manager, and I had the 2 stores. So it was just like very difficult. So I went down there myself, ran them myself for a while, kind of got things back in order. I felt like I had like a decent staff that could continue things. And then I headed back up to New York. But things were okay for a few years. But again, I was just kind of looking at the numbers, thinking they're pretty flat. And like since I left, like things got really a lot better when I was there. And then they kind of flattened out for the next couple of years. And I'm like, if I really want to make this like kind of explode, I'm gonna have to be there. And I wasn't committed to living in Florida at that time. So that's when I decided I'm gonna, they're actually profitable stores. I'm gonna put them for sale. So
Yeah, what comes to mind on this part, people, okay, audience, you're gonna just crack at me. Kenny Rogers, the gambler, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. The art of the timed sale is knowing that. It's just like the song, because too many times people wait too long. Because you said, I know they're profitable, I'm going to put it for sale now. So
yeah.
this is, as we were talking before the show, a fascinating topic for our audience. So you decide to sell. How did you go about it?
I reached out to a broker.
Okay.
Yeah, and I figured I don't know anything about selling, so I'm gonna go through a broker. Um, I, I have very mixed feelings about the broker. I think I would recommend that people, if you're selling something, in the 6 figures, that you do go through a broker. Less than that, it may not be worth it because they
I
often
agree.
require a minimum. Yeah,
I
yeah,
have mixed feelings about, when, like I said, we were talking before the show, I've been around small business brokers, I've been around angel investors, investment bankers, venture capital. When you get into the bigger ones, absolutely, they do serve a purpose. When you get into the smaller ones, I've seen more bad experiences with broker with people having to pay out more than they believe than not. Now, I'm not saying they're not good ones out there. I'm more saying just it's not like you go, okay, I'll get a broker and it's all going to be great. Like a real estate, I get
right,
a good real estate agent. It's not the same, is it? Tell us
yeah.
a little bit more about the experience and why you say those, what I believe to be words of wisdom.
Yeah. First of all, if anyone's going to go through this process, you have to accept that you have to be patient. Like,
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't necessarily in a rush. I was like, let's see what happens. I think the whole process ended up taking me about a year and a half. Like, so
That
it's not,
makes, yep, that's typical. Yep.
yeah. And I was like deep into negotiations with one buyer, and then they kind of dropped off, so we had to
Yep.
start over, and it was like that kind of thing. Um, in the end, I was pretty happy with the deal. Like it went through, and the people seemed like they were going to take good care of my store. I mean that is something that was important too,
Yep.
because like I wanted to make sure that I was going to be selling it to somebody that would actually carry it through, and not run it into the ground, because it was still, it's like a labor of love, and not like,
Yep,
you
it
know
is. It's hard to sell when it's a small company versus when it's a large one. Absolutely.
yeah,
And also a ton of numbers you had to put together too. People don't
yeah,
realize
oh yeah, I
the
mean,
amount of financial documents and the legal documents that are involved in this, but financial documents especially.
yes, I would say that, I mean, obviously they're going to ask for all your financial documents, like, certain number of years of tax returns, your P&L, all that, that's expected. What I think held me up the longest, it was like months, was uh getting my landlord to agree to the sale.
Oh,
That's the
yes,
thing.
yes, that's another
Yeah.
key point. Yes, please talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be a problem, because like I actually told our property manager, I'm like, this is what I'm planning. He's like, okay, no problem. But the thing is, it was a Simon, it was like a mall basically. So it was Simon, the huge conglomerate,
Yep,
and so it had to all go through their
or-
corporate,
yep,
and it just took months,
yeah.
and I almost lost the client because they're like, why is it taking so long? Like, we need to, like, get this going. And I'm like, I don't know what I can't really rush them along. And so, that these are just details that like I didn't really think about. I mean, I kind of thought I was doing my due diligence by talking to my property manager and saying like, is this possible and can we do this? And got the go ahead from him. But yeah, I do feel like any kind of process like this is there's a lot of there are gonna be a lot of obstacles that you just don't really know. I do feel like a good broker would be able to like kind of help you through them and like give you some guidance about what to expect.
And
Um,
approach them ahead of time. And I've had this happen where people could not sell because the landlord would not agree because they want to see the financials of the new person. They want to see this. They want,
yeah,
I mean, just, and so that's another thing, looking at a lease, signing it long term, be
yeah,
conscious of this because always people go, oh, well, I'll just take over the lease. I go, oh, no, you got to get an approval and a signature
yeah,
from the top dog that it's
yeah,
okay. And they don't realize that that could be the main reason it won't go through. So thank you for
yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, it's much different to go like in my New York for my New York store. It was this is like a very like the landlord he had like a small property business, but it was just him, so that was much easier, to get an appointment with him. He could meet the tenant that I was subletting to. It was like it happened in an afternoon, not a problem.
Right.
Yeah, with Simon, where there was like this huge corporation, it just took months and months. I want to say, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was like 5 to 6 months.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah,
And people don't realize that the landlord and you signed a contract for a duration. And so it doesn't just mean that a new person can come in and assume that lease. It's like
yeah,
you got to realize that new person. So the landlord can stop it
yeah,
because of the fact that they have authority over who signs the lease and is
yeah.
in the space. So it's the space is as much of the store as the store is.
Yeah,
If
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
very
So
much.
anyone considering that definitely, put that into your spreadsheet of like things
Yeah.
to, address as early as possible.
Yeah. Let's
But yeah,
fast forward to starting because I want to make sure we get through this in our time allotted. We'll have to come back and reach into a little bit more of this. So let's first start. What caused you to start 124 Voltaire? And it's always been online, if I understand correctly. Is that true or not?
kind of. Yeah, after I sold the store in Florida, I took those funds and opened up a small store in Brooklyn, which is where I
Okay.
live right now.
Okay.
My intention was always just to have it to get it up and running, staff it, and then go back into the workforce, and like,
Okay.
yeah. Unfortunately, then COVID happened, but even before that, I gotta say, there was something I feel like different in terms of finding good staff.
Yeah.
Like I could not, I remember even doing this consulting work and I hired somebody and I just realized I was looking at my sales. I'm like, everything I'm making from my consulting work is a drop, this exact same as like drop in sales from like,
Yeah, yeah, but
since
you're
I'm
just
not
you're
there.
working here to pay for the I have
Yeah.
people tell
I'm
me all
like, this
the time,
is,
they're working to pay for the company. I'm like, get through the company, get rid of the company, and then you're gonna work and be able to go somewhere and do something.
I know. Yeah. So, yeah. So, but then even before I could like really figure out what to do from there, COVID happened. I was forced to close for a couple months. So I was so fortunate talking about landlords. I thankfully they wanted me to sign a 5-year lease. I said, I'll sign a 2-year lease with the option to renew for another 3. So if
Okay.
anyone can kind of work in,
Yes,
like
I
things like
like
that.
those.
Yes, that would be great because I remember my neighbor before COVID happened had just re-signed her lease for 10 years and after COVID ended up having to pay a bunch of money to the landlord to get out of her lease. Whereas mine was naturally up, but I'm like, I'm not going to resign. And I just left, and it
Well, and I
was,
know Emma's in the audience here. Emma knows all about leases. She'll be on the show next month to talk about that again. I know I saw my frequent flyer. Emma, yeah, she's relating to what you're saying about not signing leases, right? But yeah, Emma, you saved me. I told her not to sign a lease. It
uh,
wasn't a good idea, and COVID hit like within the next couple
oh,
months, and she hadn't signed it. So yeah,
good. Yeah.
so yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, you could see a theme here when you're talking about brick and mortar. I don't care what you're doing, these lease documents and thinking of all the things that can happen are crucial to
Yeah.
understand what you're going to be able to and not do.
Yeah.
So After COVID and you were able to get out of the lease, did you move things online and what was
Yes.
that
Yeah, I
experience?
mean, I always had the online,
Okay.
part of the store. So then, but then I just focused on, yeah, like, I started putting more attention into the online store and kind of changing the way I bought for this business because things translate differently online than when you're selling them in person, So I was
Okay, so
purpose.
here's the big question, Ann, and I know if I don't ask this, people are going to be like, Lori, why didn't you ask that? Any theory which is easier, harder, brick and mortar, online, comparison between the two? Because I got people asking that all the time. What's your thoughts having both?
It really depends on your personality, I think. I because what's hard about brick and mortar is just that it's the maintenance. You're always there. You always have to have it staffed. But it's so much easier to sell in person. When you've got someone in front of you and you're like, throw this on, try this, and like you're styling them. And
Yeah,
it's like fun, because
right.
it's like, yeah, like, like an hour goes by so fast when you're helping someone and there's like that nice rapport. Whereas obviously having an online store, it's like it's not as much upkeep, because you're really just like shipping stuff out.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard to, there's so much competition and it's hard to get in front of people. And I no, for me, I actually realize I prefer brick and mortar. I think it's more gratifying. Like online is obviously like kind of the way people are, the trend is obviously going to online and selling online, but it's difficult. Like unless you have a pretty hefty marketing budget, um, I would say it's hard to penetrate that online market. Uh,
Yeah, I agree. And I think you bring up something I talk about a lot is that when people think brick and mortar, yes, there's the expense, and I don't like expenses, because I like
yeah.
flexibility, but it's physically seen in a small local area. When you go online, you're in this big world and people have to find you. And people think that
Yeah.
online you get mysteriously found, and you don't. You're actually, even when people say, I'm going to go on Amazon, no, you're still out in cyberspace, if I can just call it that. It's really hard to get people to the website in online.
100% agree. Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to convey that to you because people think, even I did, so I'm like, oh, it's going to be so great. All I'll have to do is just like fill a bunch of orders in the morning and then, I'll have
Yeah,
like, yeah,
by noon
no.
you're on the beach, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not the reality of things. And if you can figure out how to do that, then write a book
Come
and
on the show and let us know how
yeah.
you did. I know
Yeah.
people always say, especially the younger entrepreneurs. Oh, I had somebody say the other day they've been they've been an employee for their entire 10, 20 years in business, and so they wanted to start their own company so they could have more money and more time off. It just makes you, yeah, I know. I was just,
Oh, the innocence of it.
I know it's funny you say innocence because then perfect conversation when we're talking about she said to me she wanted to, she had no background in business, so she thought the best thing she could do is to buy a company because then it's already created, so it doesn't take anything to run it, it's already up and running, and she would have more money immediately and she'd have time off, right? And I said, a lot of the companies that are selling are not profitable. They're not profitable. And I
That's why
love
they're selling.
I know loved it because I laughed at her innocence in the next statement she said. I found it refreshing. It was so naive. She goes, "Well, why would people have a company that wasn't profitable?"
Yeah, it's never anyone's goal. It's just
I know.
that's just how it happens.
I know,
Yeah.
and I had to explain to her. I go, a lot of people, because I always say that I've seen people that will leave a relationship, a 20-year marriage like this, and will ride a company to the grave and fall in the grave with it and won't leave it. But it was so
Yeah.
innocent. Oh, why would anybody ever keep a company that's not profitable? So,
Yeah.
and we'll probably have to continue this in another discussion.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're in the process of. I'm sorry I'm leaving the good part for the end, but we had to get the story involved. What are you in the process with the online store right now?
Yeah, so now I am actually in the process of selling the online store, which is, it's a much smaller sale than when I sold my brick and mortar. So I'm
Also
doing
more
it,
challenging because it's online. It doesn't have the
yeah.
brick and mortar. So tell us how you're going about it.
Basically, I'm just listing it on Biz by Sell. I think it costs, I forget, I think it's something like around $300 for about three months.
Okay.
To me, that's just like makes much more financial sense than like hiring a broker who's usually going to require a minimum of like, I don't know, like $20,000
Yep.
for
Yep,
any
they do.
sale, no matter
Yep.
what, no matter what they sell it at. So I was like, let me try this. So yeah, I mean, sort of like my first time around, like there was a buyer, we were like deep in negotiations, and then it just kind of fell through. So like again, I've been through this already, so now I understand like patience. Like I just have to be patient, find that right buyer, like where it's like the right fit. And and just be flexible because like at this point, like this isn't my main source of income. I am kind of just like I would actually just kind of like to pass it on to somebody. And I think the real value in it is just having basically like the training that will come with it and like the setup, the initial inventory, which is obviously tariff free.
Right.
And then not having to just like build a completely new store from scratch. But yeah,
How
I mean
is that website? I've heard other people use it, and from both a buyer or seller, I guess that what's that expression, looky-loo? I think that's the expression.
yeah.
Is there a lot of looky-loos that are just
Sure.
kind of a waste of time? And how do you go about beginning to exchange financial data in a secure, confidential way?
You could have them sign an NDA. Yeah. So a lot of them would ask, like, can I see your financials? And like, oh, I'm happy to sign an NDA if you want.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there's really but for me, I'm not I don't really care about that much, like like sharing it.
Okay.
Like of course, you're gonna probably send out information to people who aren't fully serious about it, but to me, that's just the cost of doing business.
Yep, it is. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, you do get a lot of inquiries through Biz by Sell. Obviously, only a fraction of them are serious, but I think,
Right.
it's still a good resource, and I would say it's worth it. Yeah.
Well, and it's just something to consider. And I think, like she wanted to be a buyer, which now realizes that she had to tell her a little bit of how the reality of business, that's not something she's going to plan on doing. But you also have to be really diligent and do the due diligence yourself if you are purchasing it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you are a wealth of experience. I mean, if you really look at it, everything from going with those little opportunities that come your way, moving quickly when things become obvious, staying on top of things so you know when it makes financial sense and when it doesn't, not being afraid to venture out, knock on doors, but do it with intelligence analysis, not just say, I'm jumping in because that's what an entrepreneur is. And pivoting in all of these situations from the recession to then COVID to where you are now, and being involved in a big corporation that's very structured and disciplined, all the way to a brick and mortar that demands attention, discipline, and overhead, to a online, which is a whole different way of looking at things. That is a wealth of experience. And I think that's what happens when we end up not following one linear pathway. And that's what benefits us so much, because we're able then to go in whatever direction we desire to go in because we've experienced so much. I think business is about being rich in experiences. For me personally, I never care about being rich in money. I want to be super, super rich in experiences
Yeah.
and have lived a full life. So as we're parting here, any last thoughts that you would like to leave with the audience?
I would just say I think in my over 2 decades experience as an entrepreneur, I would say one thing that has always helped me through is like you had mentioned earlier, is being able to pivot. And I
Mm.
remember hearing things like when I first opened, where like you need to have your business plan and not veer from that. Like you have to like, like stick with your plan and be steadfast in your original goals. And I don't agree with that. I think you have to pivot. There's so many unknowns out there that you have to learn to turn on your heel and go in a different direction.
There's something that I learned a long time ago. It's a little bit complicated to hear, but it speaks to what you're saying, and I still talk about it a lot. And it says that I have to think about it and get it correct. In any system, either human beings or machines, the system with the greatest range of variability will be the controlling element.
Yeah. Yeah.
I learned that's an NLP teaching that I learned, when in my 20s when I became a practitioner. I thought it so wise at the time, and I've never let it go. And I have always tried to be the system with the
Yeah.
greatest variability. And
Yeah.
it
I
does
like
end
that.
up being the controlling element. It's so true. And that's what it's all about. And the other thing in my parting words is that I've been saying this the last couple years, but it's become really true to my heart and soul. And that is, I love intellect. I'm a big reader, etc. And I'm always wanting to gather more intellect. But at this age, what I really want to be surrounded about the most is wisdom. And you
Yeah.
shared a lot of wisdom with us today. And I thank you for being here and sharing your
Oh,
wisdom.
thanks so much for having me. This was
Got to
fun.
have you back. So,
And
people, when I start a story and we don't hear the end story, they're always wanting somebody to come back on and tell the story. So we're
yeah.
going to have to come back on. And guys, once again, remember, Anne is a fellow advisor with the SBDC, so you can reach out. Sadie has put her email address in repeatedly, and you can absolutely reach out and schedule an appointment at no charge. That's what the SBD says. And see, one of the cool things about our SBDC in our locations is that we are all people that have our own business and been in business. We're not employees of anybody, so we come with a wealth of experience. So with that, we got to bring Sadie back on. Another great show, Sadie.
Always. I mean, like the only thought I could have as this conversation was happening, I'm like, well, no wonder she is a business advisor at the SBDC. As we say, everyone is an expert in their field. Like, we get the best at the SBDC. Let's just real talk right there.
Yeah, we totally do. So with that, thank you so much to the frequent flyers that are here with me every single week. A shout out. I saw so many of your names. Brenda, Kim, Lamar, Emma. I didn't even catch all your names because the chat goes by, but thank you for being there with me every single week. If you were new to the show, please check back next week. We always have great shows, and you can watch anything again on YouTube. Sadie always puts the link in there. And thank you again for coming on the show. And so, with that, I have to end it and say thank you, everybody, for being here for another episode of Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams. See you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.